Well, it is an honor to get to be here with all of you. I am from Texas, so howdy. How are all y'all doing? Do you have stereotypes about Texans? Yeah. I might be one of them because I do get up every morning and I milk my goat. But let me tell you, I've already met an entire table of people here tonight who milk their cows and goats. Can I get a wave? So I feel right at home. But I'm honored to be here with you. I'm excited to get to share my story with you in support of InnerVisions. As you'll hear tonight, it is very personal to me. In fact, what we're here to support tonight is actually life or death. And so I want to start by just acknowledging that we are living in a culture that is in desperate need of hope. I'm sure you've noticed. You can turn on the TV, you can talk to a friend, you can go to the grocery store, you can talk to your kids, you can hear what's going on in your kids' friends' lives. And people are just in desperate need of hope. And we get to choose. This is something that I've realized as I've been able to share my story across the country, as I've been able to encourage people to choose to be a certain type of person, is that every one of us gets to choose whether we will be a hope giver or a hope taker in this culture that is in such desperate need of hope. And I think that it takes a very specific type of person, a specific type of organization like InnerVisions to be that type of hope giver. And tonight, as you hear my testimony, I just want to encourage you to think about what it looks like for you in this culture in desperate need of hope. You get to choose. You get to choose to be a person of integrity, somebody who stands for truth, somebody who is not ashamed of who God created you to be. And He created every single one of us to be set apart from this world. You get to choose to be a person who has confidence in disappointment because you can trust the God who goes before you. God has called me, He has called every single one of you to choose to be that type of person today in this culture. And as you'll hear from my testimony tonight, that last part of having confidence in disappointment because you can trust the God who goes before you, that encompasses the story that you're going to hear tonight. And as I share it, I hope that you'll see the importance of what InnerVisions is doing in your community through this story, and that you will know my story can be your story too. God loves you. He wants to redeem and restore your life. My sister and I got to Texas as quickly as we could via adoption. My sister and I were both adopted into a great Christian home. Our parents were absolutely wonderful. We can't imagine a better childhood, better parents, a better life, even into our adult life, being raised by who we were. We were raised knowing the truths that you've heard so many times tonight. They were truths that were spoken over us. They were instilled into us. It was the foundation that was laid for us that we are wanted, chosen, and loved as adopted kids, but also in God's family, that's what God said about us, that we were wanted, chosen, and loved, regardless of our circumstances, regardless of our adoption story. And so you can imagine growing up in a home like that and getting to junior high and high school and kids saying things who maybe didn't have the exposure to adoption, saying things like, well, gosh, we're so sorry that you're adopted, or what was it like at the orphanage? That is somebody's story, but it wasn't ours. And so we were so confused because all we knew to be true about us is, gosh, we are wanted, chosen, and loved. God wrote our story perfectly, and we knew we were adopted. We knew we had birth mothers. We knew that they could possibly become a part of our story one day. And it didn't matter the outcome because we were wanted, chosen, and loved. And so adoption was something we heard about in our home, but abortion wasn't. And I can tell you, looking back on my younger years, even some into college thinking the type of person who's been impacted by abortion will never be me. In fact, that type of person has nothing in common with me. They were not raised in the home that I was raised in. They do not live on my street. I don't know anybody who's been impacted by abortion. But I could have never been more wrong, because I realized a few years ago that I am the type of person who's been impacted by abortion. In college, I had this great plan for my life. I am actually 100% an introvert, and so God has a sense of humor, and so my plan for my life was to be a one-on-one home health care nurse, not one on 1,200 of you, okay? But in college, I was working as a home health aide, and I was studying to be a nurse, and I would drive past this building, and there were people outside standing there looking at this building. I didn't know what it was. I definitely didn't know it was a Planned Parenthood. Didn't know they performed abortions. And so one day I stopped and I asked them what they were doing, and they told me. And they told me that they were there to walk alongside these women. They were there to point them in the directions of places like InnerVisions, that they believed that abortion was taking a life, but also harming a woman. And I thought, this is great. Like, I 100% support what you're doing, but I'm an introvert. I hate controversy. God is not going to use me in that way. And so I wiped my hands clean that day and walked away, and I thought, I will never go back there. God will never use me like that. But that was my first glimpse of God's bigger picture and of his bigger plan for my life, because I would go back to those people just about 4 months later and tell them that I had found out that I am the type of person who's been impacted by abortion. My sister met her birth mother that year, and I watched them together, and I was in awe, and it was the first time that I really put a face with a birth mother and realized the sacrifice that she had made to give me my sister to complete our family. And I remember thanking her in our first meeting, like, gosh, I realized what you went through. I realized what you sacrificed for us. Thank you. And that was the first time I went home and I realized I have a birth mother, and she is a human being. She made an incredible sacrifice for me, and she deserves to hear thank you. And so I went home, I opened up the conversation with my parents. We were all excited. We all wanted to hopefully thank my birth mother. And so I called my adoption agency on the phone, and a woman named Debbie answered my phone call. And I told her my name. I told her that I wanted to hopefully find my birth mother, hopefully meet her, but at least thank her. And she was pretty quiet on the other end of the line. And then she said, Claire, this is going to sound really weird. And it did. She said, Claire, I was your birth mother's caseworker 21 years ago. She said, now I'm in reunion services, and so how neat would it be if I got to reunite with your birth mother, but I want you to know you were that special baby for me. She said, in fact, I have your baby picture on my desk. I've had it here for 21 years. She said, you had those little cast on your feet and that harness on your hips that fixed all of your health complications. I would go visit you in the hospital after your birth mother had to leave. She said, I haven't kept in touch with your birth mother. I want you to know that she was very young, but she loved you very much, and I'll do everything I can. And so I hung up the phone thinking, oh my goodness, that is so odd. Why would she have my baby picture out of all the babies for 21 years? But what I didn't know was that was my second glimpse of God's bigger picture and of his bigger plan for my life. She called on Christmas Eve of that year, and she said, Claire, I'm so excited to tell you your birth mother not only wants to talk with you, but she would love to meet you. And so we went into full planning mode. Me, my sister, my mom, being girls, we figured out what we would wear, what music would play in the background when she opened the door, and what we would eat. And we brought a stack of pictures as big as Texas to show her of my entire life. And we were so excited, and I can tell you, we met in Dallas because she lived in Oklahoma and we lived in Texas. I can tell you that when she knocked on that door and I opened it, I don't even remember what music was playing in the background. All I knew was I was laying eyes on this woman who gave me the greatest gifts in my life and my family. And we looked alike and we acted alike, and she was a nurse. And it was so neat to get to connect with her. And so we decided we wanted some time together. In fact, I really wanted to be intentional with this second meeting. And this time I would go to Oklahoma, where she lived, where she grew up, where she would have raised me if she had kept me. And I wanted to, break down those lies that maybe she believed about herself, that she wasn't a good enough mother because she placed me for adoption. I wanted her to know that she was the best mother for me because of what she had done for me. And I wanted to thank her for choosing life for me, for giving me the incredible family that she did. And so I brought a gift and a card, and I hoped that this would open up the conversation for us. And so that day I got there and I gave her this gift and this card. And for whatever reason, all I wrote on the card was, "Thank you for choosing life for me." And I signed my name. And I gave her this gift that evening, and she opened the gift first. It was a ring and a necklace with my birthstone on it, and she cried happy tears, and she asked me to put the necklace on her. And so I was fastening the necklace on her neck when I watched her open the card and read what I had wrote into it. And everything changed. And she wept, and her demeanor changed, and I cannot describe to you to this day the pain that I saw in her eyes as she just kept repeating, "Claire, I'm so sorry I didn't. I'm so sorry your life is a miracle. I'm so sorry." And I was so confused, but she said, "Claire, I need to take you into this other room. We need to talk by ourselves. I want to tell you what it was like being pregnant with you at 13. And so she grabbed my hand, and we went into this other room, and we sat on this bed, and she turned and faced me. And this is the moment that changed my life forever. And instead of me telling you what she told me, I'm going to let her.
January 7th, 11 years old. My grandma had taken me to see Top Gun. Very, very fond childhood memory. That was my safe haven, my grandma. My parents were separated. My dad, alcoholic, but always felt the love from him, even though he might be a drunk. Love. And my mom, very abusive. I don't even remember her ever hugging me, telling me she loved me, giving me any kind of compassion. So therefore I seeked outside affection from Claire's dad mainly. So I find myself with this young, good-looking jock cowboy, always never had anything to do with me at school, always after school. But I didn't care because, he'd touch me. I had felt that affection, and I think a lot of teenage girls seek outside affection if their home life isn't good and they're not getting it there. So I remember when I first thought I was pregnant at 13, I was very athletic. I knew something was different when I'd have to do the push-ups and the set-ups. I could barely do them. And I'm like, okay, something's wrong. So it came down to I need to tell my mother, the most frightening day of my life, to tell my mother. So I got up the courage and I told her. It didn't go well. Here come the beatings, the telling me how worthless I was, how horrible I was going to ruin the Fagan name. So she said, well, you're not going to have it. And I tried to fight that. I had no family support. I mean, what could I do at 13, So she takes me to the abortion clinic. I've never been so scared. I remember just sweating beads sitting in that room, waiting, And laying there, the doctor, he never one time even spoke to me. Never said a word. Just did it. All you heard was suction, and then after that is clean her up. She's done. I remember going in that bathroom and just crying, just throw up. You know, I'll never forget turning my head and seeing my baby and, you know, just there in that canister. So I don't even know how to explain the feeling, you know. At first, you're heartbroken, you're mad, you're disgusted, you know, but you can't fix it. You wish, you know, you could fix it, but you can't, you know. So in my mind, I thought with my mom's help, I just murdered my baby. So we leave there, we go home, and I'm supposed to go home and act like nothing ever happened that day. So I go home and go back to school, and I notice things still aren't, you know, right. I hadn't been sexually active at all since then. Got to where I couldn't button my pants. Well, I remember my first movement. And at first I was overjoyed thinking, oh, it didn't work. You know, I'm gonna get to have this baby that I was fighting to have. So I have to go back and tell my mom again, you know, hey, something's wrong, and she doesn't believe me. She thinks maybe I've still continued to be sexually active, which I hadn't. So she takes me back to the abortion clinic, and they say I was too far along at that time. So she drives me to Kansas, to another abortion clinic. She lost it. She screamed at the doctors, "You gotta be kidding me. You know, this little whore, she can't have this baby. We can't have this baby. You know, what are you gonna do with it?" I remember her being so angry. And I remember even the doctor trying to calm her down, you know, and say, you know, it's no one's fault. She's too far along. She was pregnant with twins. You know, it's not her fault. It's not our fault. She's too far along. She's got to have this baby. That's your only option, is to have this baby. So we went back out to the waiting area, and the receptionist is the one that told us about Deaconess Hospital, and told my mom that, you know, I could give the baby up for adoption, you know, I can go to this home. So we drove straight from Kansas to Oklahoma City. And that's where she dropped me off. I never went back home from my trip to Kansas until after Claire was born.
Thanks. As you can imagine, that's not what I expected to hear. I never imagined that I would sit face to face with my birth mother and thank her for choosing life for me, to find out that she didn't, to find out that I had been a twin, and to find out that I had survived something that was meant to end my life. But it also made sense of things for me. I was born 10 weeks premature. I weighed 3 pounds, 2 ounces. I had a dislocated hip. I had club feet, and I went through body casts until I was 2 years old to correct these complications that my birth mother was told were due to her abortion and due to the doctors breaking the amniotic sac that I was in during the abortion that successfully aborted my twin. I was a patient at the Children's Crippled Hospital in Dallas until I was 18, and Debbie, who answered my phone call, was the one that was with my birth mother during the time that she delivered me alone without her mother in the hospital. And so that night, she shared with me that we were going to meet her mother the next day, and we were going to meet the rest of the family, and my head is spinning, and I am trying to understand how to even process this new reality that I survived her abortion. And so I did the only thing that I know to do in my moment of crisis, especially at 21 years old, and I called home. I called my parents, and what they told me that night changed my perspective on my circumstances from that moment to this day, and is so much a part of why I have chosen, as an introvert, to step out of my comfort zone and share my story. They said, Claire, God's fingerprints are all over your life. He must have a really big plan for you. And you get to choose right now. You get to choose to trust God, because imagine what he will do if you're willing. You see, my new reality, my circumstance from that moment on, every single day when I wake up today, every single day for the rest of my life will remain that I am an abortion survivor. I am a twinless twin in the name of choice. I am unwanted, rejected, and aborted. Those are my circumstances. But as my head was spinning and my new reality was spinning out of control, and I was questioning God and what this means for my life, my parents reminded me that my circumstances do not define me. They reminded me that what defines me are the words that they spoke over me, the words that God says about me, the same thing he says about you, that I am wanted, chosen, and loved. And so in that moment, as I sat face to face with my birth mother, and she apologized and she felt the need to ask for my forgiveness, I chose to forgive. Because the foundation that my parents laid for me truly was one of grace and forgiveness. My birth mother's told me time and time again that she fully expected me to run out of the room that day and never look back. In fact, her words in an interview with Focus on the Family when my book came out were, I aborted your twin, then I tried to abort you, and then when that didn't work, I gave you away. How could you ever love or forgive me? But instead of running from her, God miraculously gave me his heart for her. I was able to hold her as she cried for herself, for me, for my twin, for so many losses that we were experiencing in that moment, because I knew that all the things that my parents taught me that were true about myself, they were true about her too. And what Jesus did on the cross for me, he did that for her too. And I was able to share that with her over the next few years, and she has come to know the forgiveness of God. And it is so healing and so incredible for both of us. Yes. After processing the news and trying to go back into my world of people who had never experienced abortion, I realized that I had to go somewhere. There's got to be somebody who could understand maybe what I was going through. We had searched at the time, and there was one other abortion survivor who had shared her story. Her name was Gianna Jessen, but that was all we knew. And a little voice inside my head said, remember the people on the sidewalk, the people that you said you would never go back to. And so I did. I went back to those people on the sidewalk, and I shared my story, and they cried with me, and they introduced me to a former abortion clinic director who had left her job 10 days before. And that was Abby Johnson. She ran that abortion facility in College Station, if you've seen the movie Unplanned. And she had just left her job, and so she and the people on the sidewalk who prayed for her and helped the women that were going into the clinic get to places like InnerVisions, those were my first friends who I ever met who had been impacted by abortion or cared about women and babies. But God put me in the right place at the right time. They encouraged me to share my story. I said no over and over and over again, but they kept telling me, Claire, imagine the impact that you could have. Imagine how your testimony, your humanity will expose the humanity of the unborn child. And so I said, okay, I'll do it. And I did it the first time to a little youth group, and it was terrible. I shook the whole time. I probably read everything off of my notes. But it was to a little youth group. I watched as the light bulbs went off in these kids' heads, and they were able to empathize with the woman like my birth mother who needs somebody to come alongside her, and they were also able to humanize the unborn child through my existence. And I said, okay, God, if you open the doors, I will walk through them. And joke's on me, because he's done it about 20 times a year since then. I do believe God gave me my story for such a time as this, for such a moment as this, because now, me and you, we get to know the face and the name, the story of the aborted baby. But also the woman like my birth mother, the woman who's walking through the doors of InnerVisions, scared and alone, who's getting the support that she needed, the support that my birth mother has told me she desperately was looking for. And that's what would have encouraged her to know that she was capable of motherhood and that she was worthy of walking alongside of, and that she could do it. A man came up to me a couple years ago, and he said something I hadn't thought about. He said, Claire, I care. I've been coming to these events. I care about the women. I care about the babies. He said, but something inside of me was so uprooted, so motivated to do more, to do something, to save lives, to stand in the gap with organizations like InnerVisions, because I realized as you were talking, he said, I realized that when I look at your face, I'm looking at the aborted baby because I'm looking at your twin. And I hadn't thought about it that way, but if you're like me, it's so hard to let the reality of something sink in if you haven't been directly impacted by it. But tonight, I want that reality to sink in, because you're looking at the reality of what we are missing, who we are missing because of abortion. What would it look like tonight if we let that reality set in? What would it look like to let that reality move us to action and move us to partnership with InnerVisions? How many of you have seen the movie Unplanned about Abby Johnson, my friend that I just talked about? A lot. Okay, I can't see you, so I don't know if you've seen it or not, but it's a movie about my friend Abby Johnson, who ran that abortion clinic for 8 years. And after seeing an ultrasound-guided abortion, she watched what it did to the baby, and she walked away. And she is maybe single-handedly the most influential person talking about what is actually happening inside of abortion facilities today. And she is using her experience to save an astronomical amount of lives. Well, when that movie was being filmed, because I was friends with Abby, she invited me to come to this behind-the-scenes filming of the movie. And it just so happened it was being filmed in Oklahoma, in the very town that my birth mother had her abortion. And it was being filmed about 10 minutes from where my birth mother lived. And I had this great idea. I want my birth mother to meet my friends, to meet the people and the organization leaders and the movie directors who are exposing what is happening to women like her, who are fighting on behalf of her and her baby. And so I thought, this is going to be great. And so I invited her, asked Abby. She said, of course, of course. Well, what I didn't know was that we would be touring the behind-the-scenes filming of the abortion scene during the movie. So it would be a mock-up room, just like the one she went to at 13. She has not been back since, and she would be experiencing everything she experienced at 13. And by the time I found this out, it was too late. I thought, what have I done? How can I back out of this? But we were being ushered into this room, and what I was afraid would happen happened in that room. My birth mother wept. And she said things like, Claire, I remember the smells. I remember the noises. I remember being alone. I remember how nobody spoke to me. I remember how my baby was over there. she just kept crying and saying, I remember. And we left, and I thought, oh my gosh, how am I going to redeem this situation? Because I didn't feel like we were healing in that moment. I feel like we were going down back into a hole, backwards. But afterwards, Abby invited all of us for dinner into this other room, and she got up in front of everybody. And as my birth mother and I are healing in that moment, and as I'm trying to console her, Abby talked about how she's so grateful for God's forgiveness for the 8 years she participated in the abortion industry. And my birth mother leaned over to me in that moment, and she said, Claire, if God could forgive her, I wonder if he could forgive me. And this is the reason I am so passionate about what InnerVisions is doing in your community. Because they do share the truth about abortion to save the lives of babies. But as you've heard tonight, they also care for the souls of their mothers so that they would know the forgiveness that is available to those who believe and trust in Christ. As I began to share my story more, I observed a couple things. I observed that the abortion industry has so much of what we are lacking, or so much of what we choose not to do. You see, our apathy and our silence allows women to suffer silently in the pews of our churches from past abortions, in our neighborhoods, in our families from past abortions. But our apathy and our silence also tells women that we are not their safe place. They cannot come to us. We miss grace and an opportunity to be the hands and feet of Jesus when we're apathetic and when we're silent. And I'm not preaching to y'all. I'm preaching to me. My family was guilty of this. Until I learned I survived my birth mother's abortion, we never spoke the word abortion. Have you ever asked yourself, why are Christians so uncomfortable with mercy, grace, forgiveness, and truth? As I've observed the pro-choice industry and the secular movement, like I said, I've noticed what we're lacking, what they have, because Planned Parenthood, clear as day, the abortion industry, the secular movement, clear as day, is saying, we are here for you. Have you noticed that? Planned Parenthood is saying, we are here for you. Why isn't the church? Planned Parenthood is united. Their messaging is the same. They all agree, and yet we as Christians, we as moral people, we are divided in every direction that we can be. They are not ashamed of who they are. Why are we? It's something to think about. I went to a ribbon cutting for the Creation Museum. Have you been there? The Creation Museum or the Ark Encounter in Kentucky? I highly recommend it if you haven't, but I went to this ribbon cutting for a new exhibit called the Fearfully and Wonderfully Made exhibit. And Ken Ham, the founder of these two museums, said Christians should be wearing Jesus on their sleeves. And I thought, yes. And that means Christians should be wearing the attributes of Jesus, the fruits of the Spirit on their sleeves. Mercy, grace, and forgiveness. We should be shouting it from the rooftops. And I'm so grateful, as I heard these testimonies tonight and what InnerVisions is doing, I truly believe that they are being the hands and feet of Jesus, and they are extending mercy, grace, forgiveness, truth, and the things that my birth mother needed in her moment of crisis, the things where they walk alongside them, and I am so grateful for that. I'm a mom of 4. And my husband and I are so blessed. We have 2 boys and we have 2 girls. The 3 oldest have birth mother. And I have 1 daughter who is my biological daughter, and her name is Sadie June. That might be another Texas stereotype for you. But her name is Sadie June. She is 11 years old. And when she was 5, I was driving down the road, and she quietly said something, and I couldn't hear her. I said, "What?" And she said, Mom, what about my birth mother?" So adoption is our normal in our family. And I said, "Well, I guess you do have one, and I'm sorry to disappoint." But I would say that the day that she was born was the day that the domino effect of abortion truly became real to me, really impacted my life, because I realized in that moment that I was holding a miracle, because if I hadn't survived my birth mother's abortion, that she wouldn't be here. And I think that her life shows the domino and the generational impact of abortion, because one day I hope and pray that she becomes a mother and a grandmother, and to think that none of that would be possible if that one choice had ended my life as it was meant to. But I think what's so incredible about thinking about the domino and the generational impact of abortion is because we can flip the cards and we can look at it from the domino and the generational impact of InnerVisions tonight. And we can think about every single woman who walks through the doors of InnerVisions and every single baby that's born, and we can duplicate that for generations and generations to come. In fact, can you hold up your glow sticks one more time? Okay. Imagine for every one person, say they have 3 or 4 children, imagine the lives that are saved for each of those babies that are born because of the generational impact of InnerVisions, and we get to be a part of that tonight. Isn't that so exciting? As I mentioned, I am an introvert. God gets me up here every time, and I ask him to get me through it, and he does. When I step out of my comfort zone, God does the work, and he gets the glory. I know he's trustworthy, and so tonight I want to ask you to step out of your comfort zone with me. So often we come to these events with our own plan, how we will get involved, how vocal we will be, how uncomfortable we're willing to get, how much we will give. And tonight, I just want to ask you to set your plans aside and ask God what he would have you do, what he would have you give. Who are you going to choose to be? And so I want to end with one last story of victory. I know that my story is hard to hear, it's hard to tell. But tonight we have hope because of places like InnerVisions, because of people like you. We have hope. I always imagined the first time my birth mother would come to see me speak, and I thought it would be according to my plans. But I should have known better. An organization called me in 2019, and I knew they were filming her. In fact, they filmed this video that you got to watch. But what I didn't know was that they were flying her in to see me speak. And that had never happened before. In fact, they called, I got off the phone, it was like 6 a.m, and I went in my closet before my kids went to school. I cried. I thought, how in the world am I going to speak and watch her cry those tears that she cried when she told me the first time? I just thought there's no way I could get through it. And so I called my parents, and I told them, and they said the same thing they said before. They said, Claire, this is your story. You can say no, but just pray about it. Imagine what God will do if you're willing. And so I hung up the phone like, dang it. I know what I have to do. And so I did it. She came, and she saw me speak, and it happened exactly like I thought. She cried, and it was the hardest talk I have ever given. But afterwards, I got to introduce her to the audience, and I saw clear as day as she walked up on stage, and instead of having the painful tears in her eyes like she did while I spoke, she came up here with the joy of the Lord on her face. And I knew in that moment that was our victory moment, because she grabbed my hand and she held our hands up like this together over our heads as if to say victory. And I knew in that moment we had victory over what abortion had done to us, because I could see it in her face. I was no longer the reminder to her of what abortion had taken from us, how it had hurt us, but I was a reminder to her of how God had redeemed and healed and restored our relationship, and of his mercy, grace, and forgiveness. And tonight, we have victory too. We have victory because we know that one day Christ will come back and he will make all things new and right. There will no longer be the pain of abortion. But until that day comes, I want to ask you to be the type of person that we talked about earlier. You get to choose. You get to make a commitment tonight to choose integrity and forgiveness, to choose truth, to know that your circumstances do not define who you are. Only God does and what he says about you. You can pray about things that matter daily. Be bold in how you serve and how you love. Do not compromise or remain apathetic when it's life or death for somebody like me and my twin. Choose to stand in the gap for women and children, to step out of your comfort zone, and to give generously tonight to the life-saving work of InnerVisions. And so I want to ask you that question my parents asked me. Can you imagine what God will do if you're willing? Thank you so much for having me.